Hey, welcome back to Cultural Anthropology. Today we're going to be looking at the cultural system of economy. You have your readings about this where it describes the different types of economies that might exist around the world and some of the ways in which those are structured. We're going to only briefly touch on that today. What I want to do instead is look at the way economy impacts or is impacted by other cultural systems, as well as cultural values and cultural worldviews that we've looked at before and others as well. So let's start with this definition of economy. A simple one would be this: the way materials, people, and time are organized to produce, distribute, and consume goods and services. I like that definition because it includes time, and time is in our society a commodity. It's something we give an exchange value for. It brings into perspective not just money and how money is spent, but the production, distribution, and consumption of not just goods, but the services that are offered by others. So we begin with that definition, and then let's look at how that works out again. And the book describes some simple economies, and one would be subsistence farming. If we were to try to depict this diagram, limited as it is, might help us. What it shows is that a farmer uses what they know, the knowledge they've gained through their parents and grandparents that it's been passed on over time. The readily available seeds, like whatever nutrients, fertilizer, whether that's something they put back into the soil or how they rotate the crops or whatever, and then also the seeds which they plant. All of those are used to produce food for the community. And then that production is turned back into new generations of knowledge. Some is saved for seed. The knowledge is used to determine the use of fertilizers and other things. And so the farming process benefits the community that farms it and continues on through that community. In other words, there's not an exchange of that good, whatever the crop might be, to others. Now, as communities interact, there may appear some sort of a farmer's market, a trading market, where people who produce one crop trade with others. But in a very small community, a small collective kinship group, that might not be necessary, where people just share what they have together and don't necessarily exchange it with others. But when you think about that economy and then compare it to a global supply chain, as is depicted here, this chain is very different. And I think sometimes we don't even stop to think about where our food comes from. But if you think about it, this diagram shows the many different steps that go into providing the food that we buy at our markets and at our restaurants. In this case, the farmer begins with seeds and fertilizers, but because of the scale of farming that they do and the way it's produced, they need other things as well. They need financing. Maybe it's a bank loan or savings from which they purchase the supplies to fertilize the seed that they need. They also have knowledge, but they sometimes have to pay for that knowledge through education. And so there's a cost to the knowledge that didn't exist in subsistence farming. And then that moves into the production. But once the farming is done, then there's an aggregation, farming organizations, trade groups, and then transportation kicks in. From that, it moves into things like milling and packaging, maybe drying if it's grains. Some of it might end up again in a farmer's market, a local pop-up market of some sort. Others would be passed on into distribution networks and cooperatives and different wholesalers that would take that and then sell it to others, like a local market or a restaurant, from where then we get our food. So, you stop to think about it. The money you spend for a bag of flour, some of that money goes to the market that sold it to you. Some of it goes to the wholesaler that sold it to the market. Some of it goes to the grain elevator who stored it, the mill that milled it, the packager that packaged it, the truck drivers and owners who transported it before and after processing, the traders who bought it from the farmer, the tractor company that built the tractor that the farmer uses and is still paying for, the fertilizer company, the pesticide company, a whole lot of other companies. And a portion of it goes to the interest that the farmer owes to the bank and the seed company. So what the farmer gets then is a small portion of what you pay for your bag of flour. And that's the complex system of interdependency that our global economies are built on. Everything we get, everything we buy, hardly any of it is produced locally in small batches. Most of it is produced commercially in large batches and at high cost. And there's a cost effect on that as well. A lot of subsistence farmers who just farm the crops that they need actually spend less time on labor. Maybe they don't eat as well or the high variety we do, but they often have a pretty good nutritional variety. Are we better or worse off? That's a good question, and people argue about that all the time. You can see the kinds of economies that work in the world, from small to big scale economies, and how those economies are interdependent on each other. One of the concepts that the book covered is the concept of reciprocity and exchange. No matter what economic system people are a part of, there are goods and services besides food, and some members of society involved in production of these. In this case, in the image shown here, it's the simple task of cutting hair. A beauty parlor or a barber, how do they get the food that they need if they produce a service that doesn't produce food? Well, obviously, that's going to be based on cultural size and the culture type that they're part of. Those things don't have the same value for the society as food does, then the society, the culture has to put a value on that. How that is valued is determined by the worldview and values of the culture. If the worldview emphasizes time as a commodity, then the value of the service is based on the increments of time it takes to produce the service, as well as the supplies that go into the service. And so a barber bases it on how much time they take to cut hair and how much cost they have in their facility or the supplies that they need to keep on hand. If it's more oriented towards a task perspective, you're going to pay per task. If it's more oriented towards time, you might pay towards time. You think about that way. If you were to produce a service like mowing lawns, let's take that for instance. Some of you may have earned money by mowing lawns at some point in time. If you do it privately, you're going to put your cost on the task done and the size of the task. So you're going to estimate how much you'll charge a customer based on the square footage of their lawn. Once you settle that price, you can say, this is how much I charge to mow a lawn of this size. Now, you organize the value of it based on the size of what you're doing, and you've determined how many lawns you can cut in a day. And the less time you take on cutting a lawn of that size, the more lawns you can cut and the more money you can make. If it's based on time, however, which would be the case if you worked for a large company that mowed lawns, they're only going to pay you for the time you give, and they're going to pay you per hour through the day. It's beneficial to the company if you cut more lawns in a day, but it's not as beneficial to you because you're working harder for the same amount of money that you'd get. Now, there's incentives obviously in that. You're not going to get bonuses or raises if you don't cut as many lawns, and you might have a quota to keep your job. So reciprocity is just that idea that I have something that I do that's of value, and you have something that you do that's of value, and is there a value we can put on those two things that says this much of what I do is equal to this much of what you do? That's the reciprocity and exchange system. Every economy builds off of what something's worth and trying to figure that out. And of course, this is where cultural values get involved. In the Philippines, we had a concept called suki. It's an interesting part of the reciprocity and exchange system. It's a vegetable market, and in a vegetable market in that culture, I would develop a relationship with a few of these vendors. If I go to buy vegetables, I'm not going to go to every vegetable stand, ask their price, go to the next and ask their price and try to determine what the lowest price is. I'm going to build a relationship with somebody who will give me the best price. Over time, I choose 2 or 3 vendors that I like their produce. I find what I need there. They seem to always have exactly what I want, and they have good quality, and prices is negotiable. When you first step into a market like this, you're negotiating for everything, especially the foreigner. You're completely negotiating on the price, and you offer a price and they give you a higher price. You try to figure out what the right price is in between. Once you determine somebody has a relationship with you and they call themselves your suki, or you call them your suki, then when you go to that person in the market, they have already determined that it is worth their while to sell to you, and therefore they will give you the best price that they can give you, and they will give you the best quality they can give you, and you will then therefore make a commitment to buy from them instead of other people. It's not a formal commitment, but an assumed commitment. If you go to your suki and you want mangoes and they don't have mangoes, and you're like, oh, you don't have any mangoes today? No, but we'll get you some. They will go and buy them from another vendor for you, bring them back and sell them to you at a good price. If you have a really strong suki relationship and they know you like a certain product or you regularly buy a certain thing, they will hold enough for you, anticipating your coming. That economic relationship you tie yourself into is a form of reciprocity as well. When you look at other systems we've talked about how they influence the economy, you think about how kinship might influence the economy. Kinship structure of a culture influences the economy because a strong collectivist perspective on kinship will pull toward production that benefits the extended family. And it's a mentality of working together to get what we all need. So rather than trying to find and build and produce what I need or make the money I need, we produce together as a collective, as a group, as a family. It also drives the idea of an inherited role. If your father was a farmer, you're a farmer. If your father was a carpenter, you're a carpenter. It holds a solidarity together. In a collective structure, reciprocity exchange likely also exists within the collective. So each one does their part, and all the activity of the collective belongs to all. Therefore, I'm not being paid for the services I do and then buying food from you. I simply contribute my services to the community. If I make clothing and you produce food, all of that goes into one big pot, and then we all get what we need from that. We exchange goods and services, but there's not a strict valuation put on it because of what we all do to pull our weight for the community. Obviously, if somebody isn't pulling their weight for the community will have some sort of recourse for that as well. The next question is, how does government influence an economy? Obviously, governments involve themselves in economics, and the bigger the government, or the more formal the government, the more likely it is to have many regulations that govern production and distribution. And you think about all the laws that might exist. We'd have wage laws, how much or how little you can pay somebody, what a minimum wage is, what an equitable wage is, restrictions on the age of workers, can children work and get paid for it or not, and restrictions on the number of hours somebody might work in a day, or a certain industry, how many hours a truck driver can drive, or things like that. And there's taxes and fees and restrictions on the use of chemicals and governing that. The larger scale governments are going to have more and more laws governing the economy. Governments have also tried to standardize production and wages. Communism was an attempt to equalize all members of society, no matter what the role in production was, to get back to that simple collective kinship mentality, but on a massive scale. The problems with it were obvious in terms of reciprocity. It caused people to work less because they were not getting any value or benefit from the amount of work they put into something. So if everybody gets the same for whatever work they produce, then why should I be incentivized to produce more? Many of the experiments with that have completely failed because people have no incentive to do something to better their lives. And then thirdly, you think about how education influences society. And we actually talk about a knowledge-based economy in our day and age. Does society put value on knowledge? And what is the value they put on knowledge? Do people who spend time deliberately gaining knowledge provide value with that knowledge that they've gained? And therefore, do they get more pay, or is more value put on their work because of the amount of education they've put behind their work? Many companies, many industries have that. In a knowledge economy, people are actually paid for what they know, not just what they do. Education itself is a knowledge economy. I get paid in a sense for what I know as a professor. I continue to learn, I continue to explore new things, and my ability to bring that to the people who need that knowledge is considered valuable. That's another form of the way growth of knowledge affects the economy. And when you think about cultural values, and I think this is important, when we think about the ways these things might influence the way an economy works. Take inequality, for instance. Obviously, if we categorize people as unequal or less equal, then we'll value their labor less. We'll give less value in return for their labor. So if there's high gender inequality, then women will be paid less for the same labor that men do. If there's a high racial inequality, then it's likely that people of certain ethnicities or races will get less in return for their labor than people of other races, the predominant race being the one that controls that. And that happens all over the world. So inequality affects the economy and buying power and value of labor and value of products. Things like solidarity, kind of mentioned that already, but the sense of building togetherness in the community might be a high cultural value. And therefore, if you get ahead in the community, if you're creating a business that becomes a threat to other businesses, you're not seen as a good person if you're taking business away from somebody else. And so there's a sense of building that solidarity between people, and it kind of keeps it level. You saw that picture of the vegetable market in the Philippines. And traditionally, this is the way markets often work. There'd be a whole section of hardware, a whole section of vegetable, a whole section of meat and fish. And all the vendors were side by side in that section of the market. There was a solidarity. Nobody's undercutting, because if I sell the same vegetables for a lower price than everybody else in the market, nobody's going to like me. And they're not going to let me have a stall in the market because I'm not playing by the rules. So the prices stay relatively the same. That's a solidarity issue. Charging too little for the same product shows that I'm not a good person. I lack a sense of solidarity. So how strong is that value in the culture? That will determine how the economy works. Beauty. We pay for beauty. And economies develop a value for items that have little functional value, but high aesthetic value. So that might include things like home decor or jewelry or art. It might also include services to make you beautiful, such as hairstylists, a tattoo artist, or a makeup artist, things that enhance beauty. An interior decorator has a value because of the knowledge and the skill that they have to decorate a house and create a more beautiful layout of the house, and people are willing to give value for that. Comfort is another one. We pay to be comfortable. Services that might make us more comfortable might be in non-essential clothing or in choosing clothing specifically for its comfort value. Or household furnishings might be another one, or various services that we get comfort from people like therapists, massage therapists, physical therapists, doctors, and others who give us comfort, psychiatric treatment, things like that. So how a culture values comfort determines whether people are going to get value for that good or service. Some cultures look at other cultures and say, why would you even pay for that? Think for a moment and take some time maybe after this lesson to think about, what are you willing to spend your money on? What kind of things do you think are valuable to you that you're willing to give money for? Do other cultures that you've had contact with, do you think people in that culture value that thing the same? And why or why not? Is it purely the aesthetic value? Is it also a status value? Why do you choose AirPods over other earphones? Are they actually better, or is it the status? That's a question of value that is driving economy. So some things that you might want to think about. And that's a thing to explore as you go into a new culture is what does it look like in this culture? What are the things that people value in this culture that I don't value? They'll actually put monetary value on or reciprocity value on, exchange value on. And then when you get down to the worldview level, you think about concepts like limited good, which is a concept that there's a limited quantity of goods in the universe. And therefore, if you are very wealthy and I'm very poor, it means that you probably have some of mine. You've taken control over more than was your due to take control of. There's only so much available. And if you have a lot, I have a little, you have some of what should have been mine. And therefore, you have an obligation to me in the patron-client societies where a wealthy landowner has a lot, but also takes responsibility for those who work for them who don't have a lot and has a sense of obligation to protect and make sure that they're not malnourished and that their life is reasonably good, even if they don't bring them up to the same level. There's a sense of obligation because of that sense of limited good. That's one worldview perspective. Another worldview perspective that might occur in a culture is fatalism. If the future can't be known, or if the future is already prescribed and there's no changing the outcome of the future, then what advantage is there for us to try to get ahead? Why should you try to better your life if it's already been scripted out for you? If you get wealthy, it's your fate to get wealthy. If you're poor, it's your fate to be poor. If you're poor, why should you try to get ahead? Because it's just your fate. Why should you even store it for the future? Why should you work today for what you might hold for tomorrow? Just do what you need to do today and just get by, and what comes. What will be, right? That's a fatalistic outlook on life that some cultures have built into them. And so it means that you're looking at people in poverty thinking, oh my goodness, these poor people, and they're looking at themselves as, well, why should I fight this? This is who I am created to be. On the other side is the unlimited opportunity perspective, where the world is before you and you should try to get as much as you can out of it and take every opportunity. And if you get wealthy, you should still try to get even more wealthy and build wealth on top of wealth on top of wealth. Why not? Because just look at the opportunity, and everybody has the same opportunity. And the reason I'm wealthy is because I took advantage of the opportunity and you did not, because it's unlimited opportunity. Different worldviews, different perspectives, but it drives the way the economy works. You can begin to see that. Another one that comes in here, I think is important for us to think about, is the way debt, gratitude, and shame work within cultures, and how that drives the economy. What happens when we become indebted to others? When others help us out, when people give us good things and give us gifts, how does that impact us? There's a reciprocity that kicks in. First of all, it has to be showing gratitude. But how does a culture show gratitude? Do I show gratitude by giving you back an equal value? Or if I know that you are wealthy and I'm poor and I'll never be able to repay you, do I show you my gratitude in a way that is equitable to what I'm capable of giving, and you accept that gratitude as a full reciprocity? So even though I can never repay you for what you gave me, I will repay you what I can, and you'll be happy with that and never try to exact the debt out of me. If it's a gift that you give, if it's something you do just out of your kindness of your heart, then I might try to give you small gifts to show you my appreciation for the big gift that you gave me. I might also indebt myself to you. And that's where the concept of indentured servants become, because, wow, this person is so benevolent, so good, and they've given so much to me. I will now walk faithfully for them and choose to be a servant in their household. So different kinds of gratitude. If you're going into a culture that practices some sort of indenture like that by just being kind and giving people money when they're poor, you could find that you have this person now who sees you as their protector and sees themselves as your servant, and now is binding themselves to you. And is that what you intended? And are you actually capable or willing of keeping up that relationship? Another one is shame. And a lot of missionaries struggle to understand this. I once loaned money to a church member who quit coming to church until they could pay me back because they were ashamed, because they owed me more than they could pay me. And they knew it. Until they had the opportunity to give me back what they borrowed, they were ashamed. So I found that it was better to give money than to lend money and not expect anything in return, because then I could communicate that this is just a gift. And then they would show me gratitude in ways that they didn't feel the indebtedness that a formal debt relationship created, and their shame, their inability to pay me back would create a distance in our relationship. So you build a good friendship, you lend them money, and all of a sudden they're not a friend anymore, or you can't find them anymore, and they hide from you when you come. You need to understand that as cultures deal with that as well. There's some new features of modern economies that we probably should think about real quickly here, and just think about the gig economy. This chart shows all the many different apps that exist. I don't know when this is from, so how complete it might be, but at a certain given time that this was made, it just shows some of the ones the best, things like Etsy and Uber, Airbnb and Lyft. These are things that people do outside of their normal job generally, or they might do multiple things like this. Instead of getting a full-time job, they sign up for the ability to use their skill or their property to produce a good or service for other people and get paid at a certain rate for doing it. It changes the way we think about employment, doesn't it? Do you have a job or do you do gigs? And that's kind of a new way of exchange within our society today. The other one is kind of interesting. It's the whole influencer economy. I'm going to admit that I still don't quite understand how this works, but think about, when did you last buy something because it was featured by an influencer on social media? There are product placements or people showing things. Sometimes when I want to buy something, I might look at videos about the different products. I was actually looking at something earlier today online, and I wanted to know which brand was the better one. So I looked at several different websites of people who compared that. Now, I didn't go to videos, but I could have gone to YouTube and looked at people who had used that product and gave their endorsement of that product. Companies will pay somebody to specifically do a video showcasing their product because that influences other people. So they're influencers. But there are influencers also in places like TikTok and Instagram who gain a following. A company says, oh, your ability to draw a crowd means that I would like to place a Coke bottle in your next video so that I can sell more Coke or whatever the product is. Have you ever been involved in providing influence for a product, event, or a destination? And did you make any money on it? Or did you do it just out of the goodness of your heart? I sometimes leave reviews on products I buy. Why do I leave reviews? I don't get any money for leaving reviews. I don't do enough reviews to get money. I could, if my reviews were good enough and consistent enough. Some company might say, hey, I'll give you so much money if you'll review my product. And sometimes people actually make money by getting free products to review. It's kind of a crazy new economy that we're a part of, where people are making money this way. Now, it's raised a lot of hopes, and I think it gets problematic. There are people who just spend a lot of time on Instagram posting videos, hoping for that break, hoping to get to that place where they're starting to make money. And a lot of people are disappointed because they feel like somehow this should be my right. I should be paid for all these videos I'm doing because other people are getting paid for all those videos they're doing. There are some who get paid inordinately. And putting this together, I saw on a BBC news brief a figure that just, I can't even imagine that this is actually true, but this is what the BBC says. Kylie Jenner makes $1.2 million per post on Instagram. That's preposterous if that's true. Cristiano Ronaldo, again, $975,000 per post on Instagram. Why? Because their influence is seen as significant. They're posting product placement, there's advertising associated with their posts, there's all sorts of things that go on to drive that economy. It's a whole new economy that's come up because of the internet. Eric DeHaans, in an article published in Adweek in October 2021, says we're all part of the influence economy now. What he meant is this, that all companies are now involved in this. Everybody's doing it. But in a sense, we could say that we're all a part of it. In one notable statement, he says the outbreak of the pandemic in 2020 rippled across the globe as all communal spaces were shuttered in response to the worldwide public health crisis. Everything from school and work to doctor visits and spin classes went virtual. The steady but gradual economic growth gave way to a 10-year acceleration in just 3 months, changing the retail landscape forever. So in 3 months, the economy had a 10-year, what would normally be a 10-year change in the way the economy functioned. And so he says the customer journey isn't linear anymore. For example, a person might discover a product on YouTube, read something on Twitter about it, and later make their final purchase through Instagram. This is where he says creators are truly the linchpin of social commerce. Previously, social platforms were so focused on capturing ad dollars that they treated influencers like competition. Now platforms are trying to enable influencers to drive sales directly. Indeed, platforms are starting to understand that it's the creators who bring trust and validation into the social space, and that's what helps brands generate more revenue. So completely different economy than we've ever experienced before. You think about trends that change economies. Sometimes a single trend can change an economy forever. This is a map of the Bakken Formation oil fields of North Dakota, and centered on Williston, North Dakota. And in 2006, shale oil, large deposit of shale oil was discovered in the Bakken Formation. And as a result of that, the economy of Williston, North Dakota changed dramatically over a very short period of time. The population grew from 12,000 to 40,000 in a few short years. That population was not just growth, but also displacement, because the value of a single one-bedroom apartment in Williston, the height of the oil boom, was higher priced than a similar sized apartment in Manhattan. So some of the highest real estate values in the entire country. And that displaced people because people said, wow, I can rent out my house to a group of oil men and make a huge amount of money renting out my house and move somewhere else. And so the people who had lived there moved away. New people displaced them, predominantly single men. So a large population of single men moving in. And then you see on the picture here on the right, the dormitory spaces that were even built for some of these men. And then all jobs in all sectors went up in value. The Walmart in Wilson was the highest paying Walmart in the country. Subway and McDonald's and all these paid higher. Of course, you got a lot of money if you got into Williston and worked there, but you spent a lot of money on rent, food, and services because it changed the economy of that community significantly. Eventually, booms bust. And when the boom busts, then people move out again, people move away. And that's where Williston is at today, starting in the late part of the last decade. It began to reverse, and now the population has dropped significantly. Apartments are so available now that the price plummeted. I think the current price for apartment is something like 900. It was up to 3,000 for a one bedroom at one time. And some apartments are even offering 1 or 2 or 3 month free rent if you'll jump over to their apartment building because they're so desperate for people to live there. And many apartments sitting empty, many houses sitting empty. Many businesses like this one have closed down as a result. Businesses that opened because of the new economy caused by the boom closed because of the change of the economy caused by the bust. I mean, you can imagine with a population predominantly of single men or men living away from their families, prostitution and drugs was a significant problem. And yet the police force size was not able to change as rapidly as it needed to. And so crime became a big deal. And some of what is left behind is still some of the crime. So the whole economy of the community changes because of a new product or something that comes in. Another example that you sometimes hear about is quinoa. This was a trend. Popularity of this grain started to grow across the world. It became trendy to eat it, seen as a super health food, and that dramatically changed the lives of the growers in the Andes Mountains where this grain originally comes from. At first, it was actually a benefit. Farmers began to make a lot of money for their grain, and traders actually passed on some of that wealth to the farmers. But they also began to restrict what farmers grew. Many of the farmers had grown multiple varieties of quinoa. There's so many different varieties of quinoa. And they found the ones that shipped the best, the ones that handled shipping time and storage time, and then pressed the farmers to grow only those kinds. So many farmers quit growing some of the older grains that they used to grow in favor of more resilient grains. And so different grains disappeared, different types of quinoa actually disappeared. What happened is that growers in places like California and other places began to find that they could grow in larger quantities. They could grow the same grain. And so they soon displaced the production of the farmers in the Andes, who then were not getting as much. And so now they're back to a more basic economy that they had before the boom, having experienced this boom, but no longer experiencing this boom, while quinoa also has tapered off as a trend within the world and is not as valuable as it was for a very short period of time. So a very small change in the economy where some health food people begin to promote a grain like quinoa can change the distribution system of the entire planet and can change the lives of farmers thousands of miles away. And lastly on this, I think about COVID and the years 2019 through 2021 and how that changed economies around the world. It pushed people to what we talked about with the gig economy. It pushed people to buying online instead of local. And so a lot of stores closed down. In Minnesota, 94 restaurants that closed down temporarily for COVID were still closed down in 2022. Unemployment in Minnesota went from 2.9% to 9.9% during COVID as employers cut jobs in record numbers. In 2019, 2,700 new businesses were started across the state of Minnesota. In 2020, 8,637 closed, a net loss of about 6,000 new establishments. 26% of all businesses that closed because of COVID are still closed. That's a significant change to our economy. You can see the impacts on that. And you can see the impacts across the state. And you think about other impacts that came because of COVID in terms of the supply chain not working the way it used to work anymore. Truckers and other industries having to shut down temporarily because of COVID created demand for things, and then people overbought because of supply and demand. The anecdote is toilet paper, but everything during COVID dramatically changed our economy. So economies are delicate things. They're very complex. They're very interconnected things. And I think that's one of the things we need to understand about them as we go out into the world, that you, even by your presence, are impacting the economy. When you go into a community and you're willing to pay twice as much as the local is willing to pay, then all of a sudden the vendor begins to think, well, I could charge more for this. And now other people's prices go up. And so, kind of like what happened in Williston, because people were willing to pay more, then the prices went up for everybody. And then the people who couldn't afford to pay more had to leave the community. So we change economies all the time. Economies are complex things, and they're deeply influenced by our culture and our culture's values. All right, I think that's enough for today.